Disclaimer. The purpose of this video is to bring awareness to the flaws that are deteriorating this game, some far more rapidly than others, and to provide solutions to fix these issues at hand. This video is not to slander the game or an attempt to attack the game in any way, rather to bring constructive criticism through my own opinions, observations, and frustrations of the game's current state. Roblox has a lot of these ASIM games out there, becoming more popularized than ever with the success of Forsaken specifically, and interest emerging in its genre leading to people finding others like Pillar Chase, or more recently games like Outcome Memories or Die of Death, just to name a few examples. These games are fun, with good reason, I would say. The gameplay is fast-paced and thrilling, rounds are short and easy, you can hop in and out of them very easily as well. There's a lot of skill and knowledge that comes into play, lots of content to grind, and most importantly for a lot of people, a lot of content to view and make on these types of games. But right now, these games are pretty darn flawed, some way more than others, and the most notable example also happens to stem from the most popular game in the genre as it stands. It's led to this game becoming less and less enjoyable within the community, building feelings of frustration and weariness towards the state of the game, and for some, just losing interest altogether. I've started to see this decline from creating content for some of these games, and a lot more towards dramas or opinionating thoughts surrounding these games, or straight up venting both in videos or in social media posts, expressing clear frustration towards the game they once loved, now feeling as though it's kind of falling apart by the seams. As someone who's played these style of games since the release of Dead by Daylight back in 2016, and on Roblox since the days of Insurgent, if you even know what that game is, I sympathize with a lot of the feelings that people have right now. I've even found myself burning out from the game that I once played near daily. I wanted to know why I felt this way though, about a game that I've come to love so dearly, and for so long. This genre of games is at a very confusing time right now, I would say. Many games feel that they're flawed to the point where it's just frustrating to even engage with them. But as much as I do feel that is the case, I don't think it's entirely doom and gloom like a lot of people want to say. I'd like to highlight what I've found to be some of the foundational problems within these games through the next couple of longer videos that I make, but more importantly, I want to talk about how these can be fixed by the developers who work as hard as they do on these games, and I want to start by discussing the one that is not only the most successful in today's standings, but also, I would say, suffering from the most problems from my point of view and my own observations. This video will highlight some of the most detrimental flaws impacting Forsaken right now, and later on propose solutions in an effort to fix these problems before it impacts their reputation any further than it has already, and perhaps even bring the game back to what once drew people into the unique world and gameplay that, including myself, a lot of people came to appreciate the game for. I really hope you do enjoy. One of the biggest flaws that more people are noticing now more than ever has to do with the game's identity. Roblox isn't exactly known for being horror. I don't think very many even scratch what we would call a thriller game, if we're really being honest here. But these games still require a sense of some identity for a variety of reasons. It grounds the game in this reality that they want to present themselves in, it sets the tone for the game and for the audience, and most importantly, it really sets the groundwork for what the game wants to be in the future and in the present. Lately though, the game really started to stumble when it comes to sticking to an identity and pursuing what kind of game that the devs want it to be. I'm not against the idea of change, and in fact, I hope that nobody is. But how drastic of a shift in tone and identity that game takes, and how quickly that change can make a game feel as though it's really struggling to find identity, or in other cases it feels as though it's being drained from the inside out of the game. At first, I think this game was going full steam ahead in a really cool idea of a slightly gritty survival game set in a very nostalgic era of the platform. But with every consecutive update, that tone has been getting quickly replaced with whimsical, fictitious scenes that really stray away from that gritty tone, or even one of quote-unquote surviving for that matter. The most blatant reason is pretty hard to miss: skins and customization. Lately, Forsaken's customization has been very predominantly focused on collaborations and non-original skins. Many of these skins are from IPs that either very loosely or don't at all fit the genre Forsaken is in, and as a result, when these cosmetics do release, they feel out of place from the game's atmosphere or environmental storytelling it wants to convey. It's hard to engage in these stories or what's going on with these characters or the universe they're in when I'm watching this edgy Hatsune Miku chasing after Engineer from TF2 while Tito goes in for a backstab. That's not to say that there aren't any good collaboration skins at all. For example, the Die of Death ones actually do work for the game, even though it's not nearly as gritty or unnerving, because both games fall into the same kind of genre and, to a degree, identity and core of their game. Another good example is the one Shedletsky skin that turns him into James Sunderland, which, while they don't have the same sort of core gameplay aesthetics, they both fit in the general survival horror genre. But unfortunately, it's really hard to appreciate these skins and enjoy what they bring to the table, or the original skins that are pretty infrequent, when the most hyped up and the most popular skins belong to collaborations from other games, and from skins that greatly stray away from that grounded reality the world of Forsaken wants to convey, this gritty, cruel battle for survival. Some of these skins are even designed to be the popular ones, with custom chase themes, custom effects, and even then, these skins tend to either not live up to the expectations that they are set, or they get so botched so heavily that the skins become distasteful to what it was planned out to be. With how cosmetics are currently prioritized for new content being added to the game, yet this content isn't shaped up to what it should be, or is planned to be, or expected to be, it's hard not to notice that these changes to what kinds of skins are being released and how they're impacting the game to stray away from the original material and the original identity the game wanted to be, and focus more on collaborations and purely cosmetic enjoyment. It's not only the fact that the recent cosmetic releases have strayed away from the tone of the game, though. As I mentioned earlier, there is another aspect, and that's the rate at which these changes and updates occur. Forsaken's updates are done in very big, event-like moments, typically as monthly releases, where each content update adds quite a bit to the game. This isn't inherently bad, though. Plenty of other games do this as well, so that each update feels impactful and gets players to come back for longer periods of time. However, it also means that when content comes out, it's going to leave a longer-lasting impact that takes more time to fix the impressions of later on. With multiple updates now, including a larger emphasis on the cosmetic releases and the collaborations, rather than meaningful balance changes or actual content being added to the game, it makes it so that with content related to things that aren't exactly revolving around the original identity, it makes it harder to engage with what's being offered to the table. Furthermore, content related to the actual world building of the game is done through very little teases around the map, or is completely outside the game. So the impact and lasting impressions that it has on the game is starting to shift away from what they once offered, and now the cosmetic appeal has become deeply rooted with the identity of the game, making it even harder for people to show appreciation towards the original ideas of this nightmarish reality and this gritty survival tone, when people remember the game more for wacky skins and their favorite characters entering the game instead. Looking at one of the most recent teasers for what became another skin for Slasher, some of the top comments were jokingly talking about the references to a very particular certain bear-themed IP, or adding a load of new skins for their next big update, rather than actual content that could shake up the game back to its roots. It's just another reminder that people remember and engage more with the game's newer identity of purely cosmetic appeal, rather than what this game kinda, sorta, in some flimsy way wants to be. Now, I do want to express that Forsaken is capable of making good updates. Their latest patch to the game was actually a pretty solid update, adding content that people have been asking for, and focusing on balance changes more than skins. I'll talk more about balance later, but this goes to show that Forsaken is in fact capable of making updates that benefit the health of this game, while still adding some neat content. I'm glad to see that they're capable of making these changes to improve the state of certain characters, or at the very least just try to shake things up a little bit. But it begs the question as to why these kinds of things aren't done in larger releases too. Why can't we see this kind of approach to balance changes and updates as a whole that really shake up how characters play or help these characters out more when more players are interested in the game with bigger updates? It's not that I'm upset about this, I'm more just curious from the developer perspective on why this is the case. Forsaken is a game with two clashing identities, and the inability to pick which one it wants to follow due to how rapidly one of these identities entered the core of the game and how rooted it is in the development team's priorities now. When you're the killer or the monster in a game like this, typically you want to feel as though you have the power to kill your opponents. You finally have a chance to turn the tide after multiple games of suffering through what is the survival role, doing all you can just to ensure you do not die. The point of the power role, as I call it, is to have your chance to shine on your own and use a much more powerful skill set to take down the survivors. You're able to feel powerful for once, almost to a point where you are a force to be reckoned with. But at the same time, it's important that when you are stuck as the survivor, you feel as though you have the chance to win through cunning decision-making and through your own skill expression. Balance is a very touchy subject for a multitude of reasons. These games aren't meant to be symmetrical, they're asymmetrical. The balance is inherently going to be complex, and in some cases, purposefully one-sided. That's the point of having a power role. And this role is more important than anything else in these games since it's a crucial piece that defines the genre. But when playing this role feels lackluster because it's overtuned, or even worse, dreadful because it's undertuned, the power role that is supposed to be a reward for playing longer and for going against these other players instead feels like a chore, to the point that players will actively disable the role, complain about it all the time, or just stop playing the game at one point. This point is sort of twofold though. Some games can be boiled down to simply having stats and balance changes to stats that make them underperform or overperform in comparison to other characters or the opposing team. And these issues are usually pretty easy to fix just by tweaking numbers to the code to bring more impact, or tweak them to bring less impact in what they do. And it doesn't drastically make or break the design philosophy of the game. But some games and some choices have critical design decisions that make these characters unenjoyable to play as or against. Forsaken has the latter problem with a couple characters, and as time goes on, these characters are either not addressed at all, or they get addressed in the wrong type of ways. Since I mentioned the killer role being important, why don't we start there, with the free character that everyone can play as, and has gotten very little for months now. With the whole redesign to Slasher instead of Jason, it's kinda crazy that barely anything was touched balance-wise to his kit to make him more interesting to play or improve on, when he's already this rush-down style killer, and the only way he even got anything was a patch done most recently to help him with a buff to the only playstyle he's already been good at, rather than helping him anywhere else in his far weaker areas. They did barely anything to him, and people have known for a while that it's hard for him to keep up with the rest of the killer cast with how little he offers to the table. He has no map-wide pressure. He has no consistent way of highlighting multiple people besides one ability for a singular person, or his stamina drain during chase. He has no ranged attack that can pressure multiple people at once. He doesn't even have crazy mobility besides raging pace, which is probably the weakest movement option in the game. I don't think anyone was asking for a crazy rework either, partly since reworks in this game also don't have a great track record. I'm looking at you 2 time. But a couple balance changes, or even just one ability being altered a little bit to keep up, would have been pretty nice to help with these weak points, compared to doing nothing and buffing the one area he's already insanely good at, which is chase potential. Another character struggling recently is Noli, and even with the recent balance changes to try and help him be more on par with other characters, I still think he also suffers from a mixture of being too survivor dependent and having abilities that are way too easily counterable. The entire gimmick of the hallucinations is, at best, pretty lackluster, and at worst, just downright frustrating. It's pretty easy to tell when it's a fake clone, and sometimes it takes way too long for these clones to go away, or for the hallucinations to stop pestering you after you already know that they're fake, making playing around Noli's kit all the more annoying rather than actually interesting. And his main kit can also just be really finicky, and while changes lately have done it some service to improve consistency, I've still encountered many times where the hitboxes feel janky more than any other killer on the roster, and control of a match can really boil down to which survivors you prioritize. Then you get characters on the flip side, which tend to have movesets that can be super oppressive in the right hands and borderline annoying for anyone opposing that character. A great example, at least subjectively, is 1x, a character I've always kind of had an issue with, and it's not actually due to balancing. In his current state, even though he's one of the stronger characters, I do think that 1x is fairly balanced and skill dependent to win consistently. But my issue stems from how the abilities restrict how you play against 1x, and how much 1x is capable of doing. 1x is one of the best melees in a game for a character based on having ranged capabilities and map-wide threats. They have the ability to immediately see everyone and get a lot of speed out of it, becoming even more dangerous in a chase for almost free value, and being able to find other players with ease. But what I think is the worst aspect by a mile is entanglement. It's a short windup, infinite range attack that can lock players in place, locks them out of using abilities, and grants 1x a speed boost, all in a singular move. This character has very little weaknesses compared to the rest of the killers, to the point that for a while 1x was the most oppressive killer to face, and although I would say it's in a much more balanced and skill-dependent spot now, it doesn't excuse the fact that this character has so much going on that other killers just wish they could capitalize on. The current killer roster in general feels incredibly lopsided, with characters that haven't been touched balance-wise and fall into lower standings each update, or they fail to hold up by pure design even with certain changes, and then there's other characters that become too oppressive or underperform if they're tweaked too far in one direction. The only character I'd say really holds up to any or all of these standards very well is Cool Kid, and that's really only because he's this weird hodgepodge of multiple ideas and characters in one. A jack of all trades, but a master of none. Turning to the survivors, it doesn't get much better. Survivalists still lack much impact on rounds unless they're tunneled into oblivion, which is obviously very unfun for that person. Supports fall into both extremes, where they either lack impact at all and become niche, or they completely alter the course of the round, putting killers in poor positions without really unfun methods, like targeting one person, solely one person, regardless of what anyone else is doing. And Sentinels continue to be the strongest role in the game by a long shot, especially a character like 2time, who gets such a high amount of value just by existing, let alone playing the game, or dare I mention the text that can be done by an 8-year-old with a keyboard. The balance across the survivors is incredibly lopsided as well, especially considering it on a role-by-role basis. But further than that, there are some characters who are just inherently more valuable by design, and more often than not, create situations where targeting can feel forced or downright necessary to win a match. This isn't to mention that this loop hasn't really changed either since earlier iterations of the game. Two-Time is really the only survivor that's had a pretty drastic change, literally going from the bottom of the roster to the very top. But otherwise, the survivalists have always felt pretty meaningless in the grand scheme of things. The Sentinels continue to reign supreme, and supports fall in a weird limbo of one or the other. I'm not asking for a total shakeup by any means, but it is notable that there are some disparities in the strengths of characters in both survivors and killers, and there's not a lot of effort being done to tighten this disparity between updates. Overall, balance in this game isn't in the greatest space. Not because of the changes, since there are good changes, but more towards the changes aren't being made in order to help the characters that are lacking in impact, or to change characters who are just constantly changing the course of the rounds and have frustrating abilities to play around. I want to preface this segment by saying that I don't really engage that deep into the Forsaken community outside of making videos, either purely for entertainment, like tier lists on the content or shorts, or like this video to spark discussions, or of my original review where I looked at it from a pretty big overview of the game. Because of this, what I'm going to discuss in this segment is a lot less anecdotal of my own experiences regarding the community and how it is handled by the dev team, and more from observing general consensus from its community and a little bit of how certain topics and content have been handled for this game. Let's just rip off the band-aid. Drama has become one of the most common stigmas for the game. There's drama regarding skins. There's drama regarding cosmetic content not living up to expectations. There's drama on scrapped content, the amount of scrapped content thanks to the game's past or present handling. There's drama on the amount of online shipping that takes less than a couple seconds to find. There's drama on the literal following of a cult based on a certain aspect of this game from a small portion of the fan base. The team behind Forsaken have had missteps. The fan base has had missteps. But I think one of the greatest missteps comes in how the community and how the dev team handle each other, and more specifically, the communication between these two parties. Let's start with one example that I pretty consistently refer back to when this kind of subject's brought up, which is the scrapped content, and the amount of this scrapped content from the game, or what justifies scrapping content. If you ever take a look at the wiki, it can really be baffling just to see how much content that this game has scrapped in its life cycle of just barely over a year since the official release according to the Roblox website. Multiple killers that could have helped to fill the already small roster of characters, a bunch of skins including some that were already fully modeled, chase themes that were replaced for bizarre reasons, and left new themes behind that were just subjectively worse than what had been scrapped, which also typically leads to cosmetics being used far less as a result, like the retro Jason theme for example, which led to almost nobody using the skin, which also wastes potential from the dev side of things. There's just a lot of content for this game that's gone scrapped, which is made worse considering that a lot of it isn't just concepts or baseline ideas being thrown around. These were ideas being worked on, pursued, models being made, themes being completed. Time was spent on these ideas to make them the best they could be before one day they were pulled and just removed, and all that effort was gone in an instant, usually for pretty odd reasons. I'm not saying that all this stuff has been pulled for unjustified reasoning, but when this much content has already been pulled out from the game, and many of these ideas were once being actively pursued, it does leave a lot to be desired, and it puts into question where effort is being placed. And I think it puts the community in an uneasy position, since anything could be scrapped from the game's development at what feels like a moment's notice. This point goes hand in hand with another issue that I've also wanted to address, being the communication regarding updates and content coming within those updates. How things are teased and what is being teased has also become quite a talking point. On one end, prior to the Nully update, almost every piece of major content was fully announced and explored before the update even dropped. During the playtest, players had full access to the killer, full access to the new maps. Most of the cosmetics that were coming were already very well known, and anything else being added was pretty openly discussed early. What this led to was a very high set of expectations for the player base, knowing what was coming, mixed with already knowing what was already in game, or in the playtest. There was very little for players to explore when this update finally did drop. Players already knew the inner workings of just about everything. The new character, how the maps played, how the maps felt, the whole 9 yards. But now, we have the other extreme where instead it feels like very little can be discussed, and anyone on that dev team has to be very tight-lipped, leaving a lot to be questioned or desired. In an interview done recently that was also teased from the official Discord server, a lot of questions relating to upcoming content was typically pretty tiptoed around, answering very vaguely and not giving much for listeners to get interested in outside of subtle clues or very broad answers with little specifics for such topics. Commenters on this interview even addressed this, whether through funny memes or through notable frustration towards topics not getting clear answers. For example, multiple people showed pretty visible concern or even annoyance towards the lack of a definitive answer for a character like Jane Doe, who is a very important character within the lore, on whether she would be a playable character or not, something that was presumably in the works for quite a while up until this point, or at the very least considered. What doesn't help is that these extremes in community content is how they choose to handle the discussion of this content. Returning to the earlier video I mentioned of the Stitch hair skin for Slasher, this was an entire trailer centered around one skin for a character who had already been in the game for quite a while, and was only getting a fresh coat of paint. Why does this random skin all of a sudden get this detail and love and care? Hopefully this is something being applied to everything coming forward or coming in the future, because otherwise that would just be a really mixed signal for where the dev resources and priorities lie when it comes to what effort should be put on display for marketing their game. When things do make it to the game, controversy can still manage to arise. A great example is something like Hacklord, noted as probably the most hyped up skin that ultimately fell flat on launch because compared to its expectations, the skin felt like it was coming out in a very half-baked state, missing multiple components to what most people more commonly saw as a higher quality skin in the game. This also relates to full character releases, like how Noli felt like he underperformed greatly compared to some of the other killers for quite a while, and had to work a lot more to get the same value as other killers. I don't think it would have been as big of a problem if it weren't for the fact that this was a character hyped for a very long time, and was finally the one to expand the killer roster after months of the same character, and the Survivor roster already got 2 characters prior to this. I don't entirely blame the devs for the decisions they've made with how they approach discussing and handling content for the game. With the amount of prior missteps, having a cautious approach to what gets announced or discussed in order to prevent these unrealistic expectations from the fan base, and to avoid what was done with the Noli update, where momentum and hype was drained before the update even came out, is a fairly realistic response, all things considered. However, from what I have seen out of the general consensus, mixed with some of my own thoughts and opinions with how things are handled, I don't think that this approach is perfect either, since it doesn't give much momentum and hype for the game's future releases, and what has been officially shown off continues to send pretty mixed signals from what content gets the spotlight and how content in general is being handled. The main point I want to take away from here is that how things are being handled and communicated from both a development and a fan base standpoint is pretty poor. with a dev team not having a clear system for communication on handling content, and the fanbase creating some pretty unrealistic expectations or thoughts regarding certain aspects of the game, most notably in the department for cosmetics, which has already turned into one of the core values and identities for this game. So, to quickly recap before we go into the solutions, we have the following 3 issues that I've boiled down to be impacting the game at its core the most. Number 1, losing the original identity of the game in favor of cosmetic appeal. Number 2, improper balancing that makes certain characters fall behind. Number 3, community engagement falling under extremes and being pretty poor overall. That leads to the question, what can be done? Is there anything that can be done at all? I think that there is, and there's actually plenty of time to make these changes to keep fans invested in the game for a while to come. But these changes do greatly depend on how willing the team and the fan base is on making core changes to how they approach content and appeal for the game. I'm going to list multiple suggestions for the game here, breaking down each one as I go to hopefully make a clear picture on how these changes would be a positive impact for the game. Number 1, picking an identity for the future of the game and sticking with it. Right now, the game is lost between 2 kinds of identities as mentioned before. The old one, focusing on world building and a survivor thriller experience, and the new one, focusing on cosmetic and customization appeal, and leaning way further into casual party game aesthetics. Whichever one Forsaken does want to go in, that's fine, but it needs to be established, rather than having an attempt at a balancing act between the two, which just doesn't work, leading to displeasing fans in general, since the original concepts are being lost to cosmetic enjoyment, but fans aren't gravitating to some of the cosmetic appeal either. Number 2, releasing teasers that are both entertaining but meaningful. Singular skins and little pieces of content don't need trailers dedicated to them. Teaser images or behind-the-scene updates are plentiful for little bits of content like this. Trailers and large-scale announcements should be reserved for the main focuses of updates, like new characters, like new maps, or reimagined content to get players excited for what the main points of these updates are and for what is to come. It also makes it so that devs don't need to be vague with discussing new content, since they would know to leave the larger bits of content coming soon until announcements are made, but it gives them the freedom to talk about some of the inner workings for the game that people are interested in, or be more open about some of the broader, less important topics to generate hype towards characters, maps, future content for the game. Number 3, balancing the type of content being added to the game. I don't mean balance in the statistical sense. I mean between actual coded content and cosmetics. As nice as getting a lot of cosmetics can be to incentivize grinding the game out, there is a notable disparity of actual new content to engage in with cosmetics being added. A better balance of fresh content to hook players into playing the game and having things to chew on, and having cosmetic options to liven the experience would greatly overall help the reception of the game and the updates that the game gets, rather than having updates that contain a lot of skins and cosmetics, which a lot of them are rarely even given consideration. Number 4, taking a closer look at the character balance in this game, and finding a good approach between power and counterplay, especially on the power role. Killers should feel powerful and menacing to go up against, but it is equally important that they do have counterplay, that they feel fair to not make a miserable experience either. More time should be spent looking at the killer designs, especially those who are falling behind, or characters that are a little overbearing at times. On the flip side, survivors should also have a nice balance between agency to turn the tide around, but also not having abilities that completely squander the appeal of playing other characters, like 2x stun just being an infinitely better version of all the other stuns in the game, really. Finally, being more clear about communication in regards to aspects of the game that have been muddied for a while now. This point kind of applies to both sides, but having better communication for how content is being chosen and pursued in this game, having clear and specific reasoning for why things ultimately may get removed or scrapped, being clear about what the intentions for the game are, these are all things that would just greatly improve the reputation of this game and of the fan base as a result. But on the other hand, it is important to not have unrealistic expectations on the devs for certain things that may be teased, since it would put less stress on the developers, and all this time and effort that they spend working on this game could be valued rather than detrimentally ruined, really. Especially the bigger, full pieces of content like new characters or maps. With these kinds of changes for the game itself and how it's being managed, I think the game can start to flourish. There are certainly other things that could be done as well, obviously, especially on the fanbase side that invests so much time in the game. But as I've said before, I don't have as much speaking power on the fanbase or community issues since I don't pursue dramas actively or community issues nearly as much as other creators out there. This video is geared a lot more towards the game itself and how to improve it both now and in the future, rather than the fan base surrounding it. I like this game a lot. I have over 200 hours in the game at the time of making this video, and I would like to see the game continue to get the levels of success that it's garnered. But I know I'm not the only one that has begun to express concerns towards some of the directions the game is taking. Talking about these issues now, rather than waiting until the game is on fire and sparking these discussions early, is the hopes I have for this video. That way, hopefully changes towards the health of the game and how it's being treated by those working on it can start to improve the state of the game, rather than continuing the current stigma of constant drama and negativity that I'm seeing more and more each and every day. If you've made it this far, then first off, thank you. But second off, I would like to simply ask you one thing as a call to action, and that's to be more vocal about how you feel towards this game, and really give thought towards how you feel about any game you play out there. One voice or opinion may not seem like a whole lot, but your thoughts matter. Your words can reach out a lot further than you may think, and it's crucial to anyone seeking to improve their craft and make something to the best of their ability that they hear feedback for what they make. The comment section is there for you to have a chance to express your thoughts, whether for the game or even through my videos. And I'd really like to hear what you have to say from my interpretation that I have made through this video, or your own thoughts about anything, really. I want there to be more discussion about what is good, what is bad, what is ugly, what needs to be improved. That's all I ask. Thank you for listening to this video. I hope it was something that gave you a little bit of food for thought, or the incentive to start talking about what you do enjoy out there. I want to make more of these videos down the line on other games that I do personally enjoy. My next one will most likely be on Outcome Memories, especially if version 0.2 comes out while working on that. So hopefully that is something you can look forward to as well. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope I get to hear from you very soon. See you later, everybody.